Good morning, everybody. Happy Cinco de Mayo. For those of you who do not know what Cinco de Mayo is, it is a Mexican independence celebration specifically to the town of Puebla. So they were able to gain their independence from French settlers, and it was a very impactful moment in history for our Mexican culture. So Mexican Independence Day in and of itself is actually on September 16th, and it's usually celebrated on the 15th all night, where there's something that they call grito, where they say Viva Mexico. So Viva Mexico, happy Cinco de Mayo. Hopefully you're celebrating with your families. But in honor of my Mexican culture, I think our Mexican culture has a lot of indigenous roots. We are indigenous. And with indigenous people, there's a lot of spirituality. And, this is why we celebrate things like Dia de los Muertos. We believe that even though our ancestors have passed on, their spirit still stays with us. And, we have altars for them. We have pictures of them. We might speak to them as if they're still a part of us. And if we're not educated in what culture looks like, it might seem, there's no light way to put it. It might seem crazy. But let me go ahead and read you a paper that I wrote in one of the trauma classes I took at Northcentral University. It was trauma. My PhD that I was working on was a PhD in the philosophy of psychology with an emphasis in trauma and disaster relief. And I think I'll just share a few of my papers and research with you as we go. I might do a child segment later as well. But let me go ahead and read it to you. It's a little short. It's called Spiritual and Physical Impacts of Trauma. And I started with a quote. Healing may not be so much about getting better as about letting go of everything that isn't you. All of the expectations, all of the beliefs, and becoming who you are. Rachel Naomi Remen. Spirituality can look different in many cultures. In the Western culture, spirituality is usually tied to illness, death, or life's purpose. In indigenous cultures, spirituality is sacred, a part of the traditional culture and part of daily life. Spirituality can be a healing avenue in trauma, and it can also be affected by trauma. For example, the First Nations people in Canada used their spirituality to find meaning in having cancer and felt that it was something sent to them by the Creator to help them connect with the spirit world, nature, and the community. This brought them a sense of peace, gratitude, and purpose as they experienced their journey through trauma. On the other hand, spirituality and religious involvement decreased for children who experienced institutional abuse in church. The spiritual impacts of trauma can be intertwined with the physical impacts when the spiritual finds meaning for the physical pain. There may be long-term health problems for trauma victims, such as skeletal issues, hearing loss, sleep disorders, and muscular problems. Trauma can cause long-term effects of hypertension, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and obesity. A trauma victim may experience catatonia, in which the body freezes in bizarre positions, or facial tics and postures. The body may physically reenact that trauma on the anniversary when the traumatic event occurred due to the psychological and emotional impact of the traumatic event. Some physical symptoms associated with trauma are headaches, muscle aches, and gastrointestinal problems. 5 impacts of trauma on spirituality. Quote, people after trauma must also cope with existential crises that include interventions in the psycho-spiritual aspects of the human psyche, such as fear of fate and death, anxiety of guilt and meaninglessness, and fear of emptiness and condemnation. Understanding the interface of the psychological and spiritual dimensions may contribute to a more efficient therapeutic practice. Spirituality relates to quality of life and mental well-being. Tomaszek and Muchacka-Cymerman, 2020, page 9. Spirituality may assist in interconnecting with cultural roots, traditional practices, and giving meaning to the traumatic experience through faith and strength. Spirituality may merge the physical with the spiritual via non-physical aspects of healing. Spirituality may affect a child's development and level of attachment to their caregivers and how they develop healthy or unhealthy relationships as they grow into adulthood. Spiritual strength may not be diminished due to complex trauma and may be utilized for coping, resiliency, and building post traumatic growth. Trauma had negative impacts on the trauma victim's involvement in church, spiritual practices, and belief in God due to deep feelings of mistrust, anger, and betrayal from being abused in religious setting. Post traumatic growth. How do we heal after trauma? PTG, post traumatic growth, occurs, and this is a quote, occurs when the trauma has been upsetting enough for a person to promote engagement and a positive outlook about the event, but not too overwhelming for survivors to handle. Tomaszek and Muchacka-Cymerman, 2020, page 9. Post-traumatic growth, PTG, is the ability to cope with stress after a traumatic event has occurred. Trauma may cause both debilitation and post-traumatic growth after specific types of traumas, such as sexual abuse or violence, when we see an increase in post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, paired with PTG, post-traumatic growth, increases behaviors that help the victim achieve meaningfulness in their situation. PTG helps the trauma victim to evaluate the past trauma and acquire a new sense of self. 3 tips for working towards post-traumatic growth. Number 1, engaging in cultural and spiritual practices that increase connection with faith, ancestors, support, humor, safety, singing, positive energy, prayer, and expressing gratitude during the difficult times. Gifford et al., 2019. And I will be sharing my resources with you, what research I based my research on. Building proximal defenses, in which your state of mind pushes the treat outside of the mental consciousness. I think I should have said that right. Allowing the victim to think positively about the situations. Tomaszek and Muchacka-Cymerman, 2020. Building rapport with others in the community and being linked to appropriate services to help address the complex trauma that assist in building stabilization and strength. Kizio et al., 2017. Post-traumatic growth positively impacts the symptoms of trauma by using the negative event to develop strengths and to find meaning in the traumatic events. Developing strengths and a new sense of purpose after trauma assists a person in building resiliency and finding peace in the horrific event that negatively changed their lives. PTG after PTSD helps the trauma victim to rebuild their lives and start a new journey with a positive outlook. My references: Berge, Mountain, Telke, Trofholz, Lingras, Dwivedi, Zak-Hunter, 2020. What I'll do is I'm just going to, when I post this on YouTube, I'm just going to post the references so that I can credit who I researched. And when I was studying my PhD program at NCU, I stopped in August just to take care of my health for a little bit. But I would love to continue my PhD work and research. And in the meantime, I mean, I did so much research and I absolutely loved it. And I had access to, the database for EBSCOhost and psych articles. And these are all peer reviewed. Peer reviewed articles, meaning that they were reviewed by the institution. There are certain guidelines to make sure that research is ethical. And so what I researched was previous research, correct? And then you compile your own paper. But all of the research that I read is legit. It's considered a primary source, not a secondary source. It's not like a newspaper. It's based on psychological studies. It's based on experiments in our field. And that's why I value my work so much. And I would love to continue my work. Blakemore, Herbert, Arnie, Parkinson, 2017. Gifford, Thomas, Grandpierre, Ukagwu, 2019. Kiesel, Somerset Ringgold, Whale, McClelland, 2017. Tomaszek, Muchacka-Cymerman, 2020. Vanderkolt, Whams or Nanny, Howell, Schwartz, Hassel, 2018. And I will go ahead and post that so that you can all have a little bit of insight on how trauma affects our body and how spirituality and post-traumatic growth can help us to heal. And as a trauma survivor, I've done a lot of self-work, and even though I still get triggered, I mean, I can really resonate with this because I'm the person who uses music and spirituality and dancing and singing as a healing power in my life. And so if you were my neighbor, you know I'm belting out all the songs and dancing and singing, and that's just what's helped me heal a lot. It's almost like recalibrated my soul or my brain or my spirit. That, and I have pain medication. Now I'm going to have to take pain medication for the rest of my life, um, but I'm doing well. I'm doing very, very well. So have a great day. Happy Cinco de Mayo. Limes fly when you're having fun. I love you, Billion and Evangeline.